So in our last Kriya class, the Kriya training that we're doing, we were looking at some sutras from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, specifically in the first chapter dealing with the definitions of consciousness. And we focused primarily on the idea of sleep and yogic sleep and why it's important to learn to practice yogic sleep. So it was an interesting exchange because for some reason it's something that after reading the Yoga Sutras and having experiences with yogic sleep, it seemed, well, of course, that's why we should practice yogic sleep. But one of the participants said, well, why would we want to do that? And it made me really think, why do we want to do that? Well, first of all, let's back up to where this is coming from, and let's back up to just what yogic sleep is about and how it works. So first of all, in the Yoga Sutras, the very first sutras, second and third sutras, the practice of yoga is defined. And the reason we use the Yoga Sutras is because it is one of the definitive texts for Kriya Yoga practice. So the first sutra says that yoga is the process of ending fluctuations and changes in the field of consciousness. It's there. Now we know what yoga is. It then goes on to say that after this, then the seer, your innate pure conscious nature, abides in its own true self, or its own true nature. And Sutra 4 reads, otherwise there is conformity to definitions. And so we have to remember that one of the most important concepts to pay attention to is that the reason we don't experience the full results of yoga is because we have a false sense of self. We think we're this body, this mind, this personality, this sense of likes and dislikes, attractions and aversions, compulsions. And yoga is essentially redirecting us back to the realization of what we are, our innate true nature, so that we can abide in that as that all the time, directly, consciously realize. We're always that anyway, but we don't always consciously know it, which is why self-realization is a very appropriate term, because you're not becoming something, you're realizing yourself fully. So this final sutra, otherwise there's conformity to definitions. Patanjali then goes on to tell us what these definitions are, what cause us to not be identified as the self, or to have this false sense of self. And the definitions are evaluation, so evaluating things, misperception, not perceiving things correctly, conceptualization, which is thinking and defining things. So for example, you see me and you have concepts about me. Well, the concepts not really what I am, just like the concepts you have about yourself are not really what you are. So concepts get in the way. And then the final two are sleep and memory. And we can understand how sleep can be a defining characteristic, because when we're sleeping, we lose consciousness sometimes. Memory is a defining characteristic because then we are defining ourselves through things from the past, which are not present. They're not actually happening, so they're not real, at least presently speaking. So this idea of sleep, why is it important? Well, the way I described yogic sleep, a lot of people teach yogic sleep, and essentially what they're really teaching is just relaxation. For example, yoga teachers after Shavasana, they'll take you into a full body scan and then relaxing the body, and they consider that yogic sleep because that is restful. It's conscious relaxation. But yogic sleep isn't just that. That's the beginning point of it. Yogic sleep is being awake and conscious while your body falls asleep. And the question came up, well, why would we want to be awake while we're sleeping? And that made me chuckle because, again, I never thought of that before. And it's not awake in the sense of how you think you're awake now, with your concepts and your definitions. It's just like when you're meditating, you experience a super conscious state. And you are alert, you are aware, you are fully present, but thought-free. And the way I like to describe it is, if you've ever been out in nature and you've seen something beautiful, a sunrise, the wind blowing across a field of wheat, the sun shining off of water, a mountain range, anything that can really invoke the sense of awe. You're awake, you're looking at it, you're aware of it, but you're not thinking about it, you're not conceptualizing, you're not misperceiving it. It's just there, it's in your awareness. That is the kind of alert awakeness that we're talking about. And so when you train yourself to fall asleep, to let your body fall asleep, yet you remain present, it's that same kind of presence that you experience in deep meditation. So you're not getting pulled into dreams, you're not falling into unconsciousness, you're not getting overwhelmed by their definitions. You are present, awake, as your infinite self beyond the body, the mind, the dreams, your past. And why is this so important? Because the whole purpose of yoga is to free you from your attachment to a personality. Doesn't mean you give up the personality, you renounce everything in your life. That's false renunciation if you try to get rid of everything. It means that you realize that this infinite consciousness is everything, including your very self. And if you can see that you are this seer, this witness consciousness, this observer, this point of pure consciousness that exists now as you're watching this video. It's the same thing that was there 2 hours ago when you were eating lunch. It's the same thing that was there when you were angry at your spouse yesterday. It's the same thing that was there when you were enjoying playing with your children or in some form of entertainment. It's the same thing that was there when you were 3 years old, the same thing that was there when you were a teenager, the same thing that will be there when you're 90, when you're 100. It's the same thing that will be there when you're dying, the same thing that was there when you were born, the same thing that's there when you're dreaming. There's a thread through all that. It's the thing that experiences it, right? You can't know about these things unless there's something that experiences it, and that's you. And so what yoga practice proper is attempting to do with its 8 limbs is to redirect you back to that capacity to know that eternal self that runs through all of these things, all time and all space. And if you do that in your sleep, then you're no longer conditioned by sleep, which means the problem with sleep is not that you sleep. That's fine. We all need sleep. It's that impulse towards non-wakefulness. And they talk about this in the sutras. So it's not the fact that you sleep. It's that most people look to sleep as an escape, just like people will look to drugs as an escape, or look to the next best thing as an escape, or whatever addiction you might have, or dying as an escape, or hanging out with friends to forget about your problems as an escape, or anything that it's like trying to escape from the present moment, anything that causes you to try to escape from the present moment. So it's not a problem to sleep. It's a problem when it's about avoiding or releasing yourself from something. So let's pull back here. When you've practiced meditation enough, Kriya Yoga enough, that you know what you are, and you know that there's nothing different between here and there, and having this thing, between having all the money in the world, the best house, good food, the best sex in the world, having people like you, having people not like you, seeing this rise and fall, because there's always going to be a rise and a fall. When you start to see that pattern and you realize that there's something there that experiences this, then you start to notice the bliss of just being that thing rather than defining yourself through these external issues. So the purpose of practicing yogic sleep is so that you are able to remain eternally present, practice remaining eternally present as that witness, whether your body is awake, whether your body is asleep, whether you're in pain, whether you're in pleasure, whether you're neutral, whether you're not. It's about following that observing presence throughout all experiences. So that's why when you feel compelled, not everyone feels compelled, because if you're still suffering from anxieties or depression, or don't really feel like letting go of your personality, or it's scary. Self-realization can be a very scary thing. Not because once you actually get there it's scary, but because you don't have any idea what it's like. And so to think about losing your identity, to losing your attachment to a point in time and space, and that's what your body and mind are. It's a point in time and space. To think that you can't exist that way, it's a scary thing. But when you have that aha moment, then this idea of exploring yogic sleep becomes much easier, because you start to realize, well, I better get a handle on this anyway, because again, I'm an eternal being, not the body, not the mind, not the personality, not the memories, not my likes and dislikes, but what I am is an eternal being. It's going to go on forever. And as long as I'm identified with that changeless essence, then what happens around me doesn't have to define me. And if I'm not defined by these things, then they can't necessarily make me suffer. And that's why in that book that I wrote, A Course in Tranquility, the main point of it was that you have to choose to be happy, choose to experience bliss, choose to experience peace for no reason. Because if you have to have a reason to experience it, my spouse has to do this, I have to have this in my life, I have to avoid this, then now you are bound to all these reasons. But if you just decide, no matter what happens, I am peace, I'm free, then nothing can take that away from you. And this is why yoga, Kriya Yoga, meditation, the whole path, and I'm not just talking about meditation or hatha yoga, I'm talking about the whole path, from the yamas and the niyamas, clear through to concentration, meditation, samadhi, and pratyahara and pranayama in between. The whole point of it is to allow you to withdraw, to know what you are, to play this role in the world, with all the ups and the downs, while staying centered as that witnessing presence, which is God, which is the divine consciousness. It's right there all the time. We're just not looking at it. So with yogic sleep, we're training ourselves to let our body sleep, let it do what it needs to do, let our mind dream. But we withdraw into that space, that eternal space that is beyond change, but that which experiences all of this. And this is something you might have to contemplate. It's something you do have to contemplate. So thinking about what we've just gone over, reflecting upon it, what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to have direct experience and direct understanding. Because no matter how much I talk about it, no matter how much you go and talk to a Kriya Yoga teacher or a non-dualist teacher and they go on and on with their words, that's going to give you some ideas to contemplate, but you have to chew on it. You have to contemplate it. That's the food that you have to digest. Otherwise, they're just laying it out there and you're looking at it and saying, oh, that looks nice. I'll come back later when I want to look at that again. But you don't actually eat it. You don't actually make it a part of you. So this is something that takes a while. In contemplation, we are going to go over this in the Kriya class here in a bit, but contemplation is very important. It helps you get your questions answered. It allows you to know what you are, and it gets you involved in this dialogue with yourself as the universe. So you're not just wondering all the time, you have direct experience. So anyway, this is my attempt to explain why yogic sleep is important. So that you can experience yourself throughout all the changes of life, no matter what state of consciousness you're in, no matter what your body's up to, that you are able to pull in and experience that witnessing presence, that eternal presence. Okay, so good talking to you again. And after the Kriya class is over, I'll get back to making some videos here, but right now I am focusing on the second Kriya book, the first book, Kriya Yoga, Continuing the Lineage of Enlightenment. This will follow up on it, and it will speak specifically to Kriya practice. It'll go into the 4 gatekeepers of liberation, yogic sleep, contemplation, all these things that over the years I found that when you put them together and you utilize them, they can really empower you to complete the process of self-realization. It'll be a good book, but it's got a ways to go. But it is enjoyable to write, and I do respond to your questions too in this book. So if anything comes up for you that you want to ask about, you can email me at astroinfo@ashevillevedicastrology.com. I might not respond immediately, but in time, as I get to that point in the book, I'll type it up and then send you the response. So be well, and it's a pleasure to speak with you again.